We all know that a dovetail joint is one of the great joints and decorative joints in history. It's great on all kinds of furniture and small boxes. But what makes a dovetail joint even better is to do a double dovetail joint. As you can see here, a double dovetail joint has an outline of a darker contrasting wood that's different from the lighter side pieces. So it's essentially, just like it says, a double, it's cut and assembled twice. So let me show you a little bit about how we make this. I'm going to be using the Incra LS Positioner Fence system on a router table. And the key to this is the template system and Incra's whole fence. So the fence slides back and forth toward a bit, and then it locks in position with incremental notches for every 1/32 of an inch. Real handy way to do that. The key to this, though, is Incra's template system. They've done all the work for you. So you start with, to make a joint, you start out with the owner's manual. And you go through here and you say, well, first I want to find what template do I want to make, or what joint do I want to make. So it gives you sections of pages of different samples for box joints, for dovetail joints, half blind, through dovetails. Some of this you go through and you find which one you want to do, and then you start from there. I'm going to be making the double dovetail joint using this system here, this template. And the template tells us here everything that we need to know to start with. So that to start with, the first thing you want to know is what bit you're going to use. And this says we're going to use a half-inch 14-degree dovetail bit. If you have a different bit, that might determine which template you use. If you already have this bit, then you can start there. It also tells you the stock size that you're going to do. So you'll need a approximate half-inch thickness for this template. And then it tells some other things that we'll get to in a little bit. The next thing you want to know then is what width of your stock do you want to look at. With a through dovetail joint, you typically want to have a half pin on each end of your stock. So what we want to do is start from here. Let's go from this end, starting with a half pin, and then we say, where do we want to find our next half pin? So if we start here, we can get about a 3 1/4 to 3 1/2 inch piece will get us another half pin on the side with 3 tails in the middle. So that if we say, okay, let's try to shoot for 3 1/2 inches, it'd be a good size, because in this case 4 inches would not work because you'd be past the pin, so you really can't make it. So some of the templates have limitations on what width stock you do. So when you get that set up, then we go to the table that tells us about what sizes we're going to be doing. So if we're going to look at, say, 3 1/4 to 3 1/2 is where we're looking, that's the size we want. And this tells us our centering point, which we'll set in a little bit. So that's good to know. We'll keep this number 7B in mind for later. So with that in mind, what you want to do then is to machine your stock to size. So I've created 4 side pieces. They're 3 1/2 inches wide, a half inch thick, and the length is whatever you want to make it. So get those ready. And then you'll need a piece for the contrasting, the outline element of a contrasting wood. I chose walnut here, and it should be 3/4 inch thick, the same width, and about 8 to 12 inches in length is fine. Then the other part you want to do is to make 3 test pieces. You want 2 additional side pieces for testing, setting the bit height. I like to use the same wood as my sides, just so that I don't have any conflicts with softer woods or any of that. So just a couple extra pieces of white oak to set the bit height, and then a piece to center the bit. So this is just a piece of poplar, same width, the length can be anything, just about that. So get all that machine, cut square, everything ready to go. Then you also have to select from Incra's choices of templates for the joint you decided. Earlier I looked in the book there, I found that I wanted the IDD template. So I select that one. This is the template that I'm going to use. This will be the joint. This will show me all the cuts that I'll make on there. So I'll install that in a little bit. The rest of these I don't need. It comes with about 2 dozen, one for each of those templates. So set that off to the side. This is the one that I want, but I don't need it yet. Okay, the first thing we need to do is to set the bit height. We're going to use one bit, the half-inch 14-degree dovetail bit, to make all cuts. And once we set the bit height, we won't have to touch it again, so it'll stay there. All right, now to set the bit height, what I've done is attach the right angle attachment to the fence. It slides back and forth to make all our tail cuts, but I put it in place, lock it with the little lock that it's got here, And then I attach my test pieces to clamp them to the right angle attachment and against the fence. Then I want to slide the fence until about half of the bit is exposed. Get close, you don't have to be real precise here, just get it pretty close. And then lock the fence in position. And then you want to take your silver measuring rule on here and slide this down. It's got a magnet along here that holds it in place. So I just want to slide that until the cursor is lined up at 0. And that's my reference point to make this set of test cuts. And now let's make those. Now I want to slide down 7/8 of an inch, as noted in the template, and make another cut. Okay, now I want to take my 2 test pieces. I want to flip, we're going to do a test fit. And that's a good fit right there. So your joint should be solid enough to hold itself in place, but yet be loose enough that you can do it by hand without using a mallet to knock it in place. If the joint's loose, you lower the bit ever so slightly, and if it's too tight, you raise the bit. All right, so with our bit height set, we're good with that. We no longer need these. We're done with the centering attachment, or we're going to move on to the centering attachment now. What we want to do is center the bit to our stock thickness. All of our test pieces and all of our stock is at 3.5 inches. So I've measured and marked a dead center on this board. Now I just want to slide it with the test piece right against the center of the board, or against the fence. I want to center it approximately. Just eyeball it. Get that pretty close to center. Lock the fence in place. Then I'm going to run a groove all the way through, and then turn around and come back the other side just an inch or so to see if we're centered. Okay, now I want to look, and sometimes you can't see it, but I want to check with my finger to see, and maybe you can see it right there is the end of my cut. So it was cutting a little more into this opposite shoulder, which means it's not perfectly centered. So I want to adjust the fence toward the bit about half that much. So that's a real settlement. That's maybe a 32nd of an inch. So I want to take and because it moves in 32nd inch increments, I can't go a full, so then I'm going to use the micro adjuster and just move it. And this is just kind of a trial and error. Just try it and see where you get. Okay, now I'll cut about another inch deeper than that to see if we're still on line. Okay, now after a couple of adjustments, I've got my bit perfectly centered to where it's not cutting a second part of into one of the walls of it, so it's cutting the exact same path as the first cut. So that means that now all of our cuts will be centered if we set the template right. So now we're going to do that. Remember earlier we selected this template. The template has an arrow indicating which end goes in first. So I'm going to just kind of slide this in. It just fits loosely. There's no adhesive or anything in here. And the friction holds it in place. It doesn't move. So now, without moving our fence, with the fence still locked, we want to find that number that we picked out of the table that said for 3.5 inches, our center mark was 7B, the blue mark right there. So I want to leave that template now in place. I'll never touch that again the rest of this project. So all my cuts now will be made with that, and all cuts will line up based on centering on 3.5 inch stock. Okay, now we're going to cut the tails in the first piece. So I got the two side pieces that are going to be my tail boards. The first thing I want to do is to look them over and pick which sides I want to, which faces I want as the outside faces. I've just chosen these because I like the look of those. Those will be my outside. I just mark them with an X to tell me that that's how they're going to be. So I'll get that done. Then I want to set the fence. Again, I'm not moving my scale. I'm just going to move the fence. And I want to get it until I can just barely touch the bit. So I want about a 32nd of an inch protruding. And right there is about where I'm at. So that's about a 32nd of an inch, because I know that the template or the fence system works on 32nd inch on notches. So that gives me a 32nd of an inch protruding from the fence. Now I want to recalibrate my metal measuring rule to 0. Again, right over with the cursor. The magnet will hold it in place. Just kind of right there. Okay, and that's going to be my starting point now for all cuts. So my 0, I won't move the silver template again, and I won't move the joint template. So those two are locked in place. So now I want to bring my right angle attachment over, lock it in place. Got my two tail boards with the outside faces pointing out. I'm going to put them, stand them upright, but for future reference, again, when I come back later, because I want to make a second set of tail cuts later, I want to make sure that I keep the same edge against the fence. So I just want to make a mark along one edge. That mark always goes against the fence. But because I'm going to be cutting through, I want to protect against blowout on the back side. So what I'm going to use is one of my test pieces from earlier as a backer board. So put the test part up, and then just clamp all three of them to the right angle attachment. Make sure that they're resting on the table and against the fence. Okay, and now I'm going to make a series of, to cut out the tails, we're going to be using the A settings on the joint template, starting from 0. So when I look at 0, I want to find the A settings to the left of 0, and I'm going to use every one of those throughout the width of my board. So I'm going to start here at 0 because I'm starting with I'm going to be cutting a pin socket first. So I'm going to make a series of shallow cuts to build up, to get to that first A cut so that I don't tear out it by making one deep cut. So, all right, let's make those tail cuts. Okay, now I want to flip the boards in for end, but keeping my marked edges against the fence, and we're going to do the other end of the boards. Okay, that's the first set of tails. Now the pins we cut with a horizontal piece laying horizontally, and we move them along that way. Now because I'm going to just need 4 short pieces that are about a little over a ½ inch wide, I don't need to cut the whole length, but I'm going to cut a series of grooves along this piece, but I only need to go about 4 inches or so. So what I'm going to do is set a stop here, just so I don't have to waste that piece. But the length will come in helpful later when we have to cross-cut these pieces in the next step. So let me just set this at about a 4-inch deep cut. Now we want to set the fence. We go back to 0, and then we look for the first B cut, the B marking, to the left of 0. So now we slide that back, and we're looking for right there at 6B. So then I'll make a cut up to the stop, pull it back, and then progress down to the next 2 B settings. Okay, and there's our first pin board. Now let's go over to the table saw and we'll cut off these short sections. Okay, to start with, what we're going to do is make a mark here that's equal to our pin board thickness, or any of our box sides. So what I want to do is, with the saw off, bring my sacrificial fence over the blade, position the blade against the fence, and then just make a mark with a pencil right there. That tells me that's the thickness of my stock. Then I want to cross-cut these pin pieces just slightly past that. So about a 32nd of an inch is plenty. The farther you go, the more sanding you're going to have to do later to remove it. So you just need to be slightly past that pencil mark. And I'm going to cut off 4 of these, but I also do an extra just in case one might break or something or split during assembly. It's always good to have a spare. So let's go ahead and cut those out. Okay, next step is to glue up the walnut pieces onto the end of the tailboard. And you can just put one on each end, glue it, clamp it, let it dry. And make sure when you do this, make sure it's centered across the thickness. So as you just kind of feel across there, it's a little bit proud along both faces. And then we'll sand that off after it's dry, we'll sand it smooth. Okay, now I want to trim these boards to the end of the tails. The template that we're using specifies that this should be 3/32 of an inch from the ends of the tails. So from the end of this tail to here, I want to make a mark 3/32 of an inch. Other templates maybe use an 1/8 of an inch, so it tells you in the owner's manual which you want. So make that mark, and then use a square to straighten that up. Then I want to do that for all 4 ends. Okay, what we want to do then is to line this mark that we made up here with the inner side of the kerf on our auxiliary fence, and then we're going to cut up to that mark. It's better to kind of sneak up on it if you can. Okay, that gives us part of the outline that we want from the outer part of the tails. Now we'll come back, and the next step is we'll cut these sockets out to maintain that outline all the way around the sockets. Okay, the first thing that I want to do is to cut a 7/32 inch rabbet vertically on the inside of the joint. So what I want to do is hold it up against the fence, and I'm going to cut a rabbet along this back edge. So what I want to do is to go back to move my fence back to 0, so that right there I know I'm going to be making a 1/32 inch cut, and then I'm just going to progress on both ends of both tails until I get to 7/32 inch deep. You got to remember that the faces that we marked with the X are on the outside, so we're making the cut on the inside of the board. And that, as you can see, if you can see this, is a 7/32 deep rabbet. That just helps it fit into the pin sockets that we'll cut later. Okay, to cut the second round of tails, we've got to pair up our marked edge to go against the fence, and we also want to put the rabbets face to face like that, so that when we cut grouped together, there won't be any tear out to worry about, because the front faces are going to be facing each other. Any tear out that happens on the back side will be irrelevant because it'll be buried inside the joint. So let's clamp these to our right angle fixture. Now we want to return to 0. And now we're going to be making the C cuts using all the C markings left of 0 across the width of our board. Starting with, again, a 32nd inch cut, we're just going to nibble away at that first tail socket. Okay, and there's our set of tails, the double dovetail. Now all we need left to do is to cut the pins on the pin boards. Okay, to cut the pin boards, these are the parts we haven't yet done anything with. We're going to cut pin sockets of them, but we only want them to be as deep as the tails. So we have to put a stop on there to limit how much that is. So the first thing we want to do is position our fence, go back to 0 from our starting point, and now we're looking for the first D cut left of 0. So we want to bring that back. We're going to make the series of D cuts. So there's our first cut. And now to control the depth of it, I'm going to put the fence stop back on. And I want the socket to be about equal to the diameter of the bit. So when I look down this stop arm, I can see that I'm just slightly over the bit. I want to do that. I'd rather start out just a little shallow. So let's start with that cut. We'll make a series of test cuts here, and then we'll do do a test. Okay, now let's do a test fit. And I'm not quite deep enough. I'm proud about a 32nd of an inch. So I want to make an adjustment. I'll just move my fence stop using the scale on the fence to line up right over here on the edge of this fence stop. I just want to use that scale and just move it a 32nd of an inch. First I'm going to line it up on a whole number so it's easy for me to see what I'm doing. Easy to remember. And now I'll make that set of cuts again. Okay, now that's a flush fitting joint. That's our proper depth. So now let's cut the other 3 pins. Okay, so there's our pin boards with the sockets cut. Now we can put together our box. There we have a double dovetailed box. All it needs is a bottom and a lid if you'd like, and you're ready to go.